Right. So there are many consequences. So physically, and this is true of men and women, but girls and women are more likely to be socialized to keep their anger quiet and ruminate, to think about it instead of talk about it. If you are not processing your emotions properly, if you're not labeling those emotions and making sense of those emotions, there are real physical ramifications to that. And they include exacerbated stress, an inability to deal properly with pain. Anger has been implicated, suppressed anger has been implicated in the course of disordered eating, chronic pain, cardiovascular ailments, autoimmune disorders. That isn't causal necessarily, but it is meaningful. It's meaningful in the way those illnesses develop and in the course of their treatment. So some of the physical effects, some of the effects are physical and others are mental. So it might be anxiety or depression or self-harm, all of which have aspects of unaddressed and deeply often suppressed anger. That's the sort of physical and mental issue. Socially, the question that I really ask in the book is, what does it mean to a society to deny entire groups of people on the basis of their identity the right to defend themselves, the right to say, this is what's important to me, and the society should be held accountable for understanding that? Because that's really what anger is, right? It's a way of actually raising your hand and saying there's something not right with the world. Something is going on here. It's a threat or a risk or is hurting me or causing an indignity. And it's a very social emotion. It's an emotion that makes demands on other people. And women are not supposed to do that. We're really socialized to put other people first, to make other people very comfortable. So we see in little girls that they are asked to stop interrupting, to use their nice voices, to smile more, to say thank you even when they don't feel thankful. And those are double standards, right? Because actually there's a pretty powerful strain of thought that is prevalent in the United States, which is that girls can regulate themselves better and that boys can't. But in fact, that's not accurate, and it doesn't happen in many other cultures. So if we believe that boys will be boys and can't control themselves, it becomes self-fulfilling, and we hold girls to stricter standards of self-regulation.
Are there biological differences between the sexes that make anger and aggression more prevalent in men than in women naturally?
So this is interesting. Women report more anger, feeling anger more, having anger for more sustained periods of time, and for more intent than having it more intensely. So it's actually a myth that men are angry more or are the angrier sex. That's not accurate according to many, many studies. And anger is an emotion, and all humans have it. That's different from aggression, right? Aggression is a behavior. People act in aggressive ways. Now, very often you'll hear someone say, well, boys are just more aggressive because they have a lot of testosterone.
Right. You talk about the testosterone in males and females.
Yeah, this is so amazing because boys and girls, men, everyone has testosterone. But a lot of people think testosterone causes these behaviors and that it's a unidirectional relationship. There's testosterone, there's more testosterone, and that's going to cause aggression. It doesn't cause anger, right? Testosterone doesn't make people angry. But in fact, there are so many really interesting studies that tell a different story of hormonal changes. And so if a person acts physically in an expansive, powerful way, if they act in a domineering way, if they also maybe demean or humiliate someone else, their testosterone levels go up. So it's the actual behavior that also changes production of this hormone. Men who are nurturers, and there are societies where men take care of infants for a greater proportion of infancy, those men's testosterone levels drop. Through the process of nurturing, they have a different hormonal mix. So these studies really suggest that we interrogate more deeply the way we're socializing our children, because boys are actually really actively encouraged to be much more physical and to take greater physical risks. And that affects their hormonal production, as does the way girls are socialized. Now, I make the point in the book that Title IX is really important for so many reasons. And
could you explain what Title IX is?
Title IX, well, we tend to think of it in terms of sports, but Title IX is an anti-discrimination law that essentially says that people cannot be discriminated against on the basis of their sex. In this case, we're talking about sports, for example. And so when Title IX happened, the primary public recognition of it was that schools had to support girls in sports. And all of a sudden that meant that girls teams were invested in, and they could join teams, and that their sports participation in the culture would be important and would be invested in. Now, it has a lot more to do, it has to do with many other things besides sports, but sports in particular are important in this way because, in fact, when people do sports, they're using their bodies in totally different ways. They're using their bodies to build strength, and they're using their bodies in ways that are very aggressive but socially sanctioned. And so
and
the
also,
ability, yes,
in theory, girls could generate more testosterone. And
absolutely. Yes, and so the behaviors are tied to hormonal production in ways that are reciprocal, right? It's not just that there are hormones and then people behave a certain way. It's that there are hormones and behavior and that they mutually reinforce each other constantly. And so the question a lot of these researchers ask is, what if we didn't socialize girls to be as risk averse or boys to be as big risk takers? Because the standard of risk for boys really puts them in a lot of danger. And so I don't want to suggest that the masculine standard for risk is the standard we should be measured against, because in fact, it ends up that a lot of boys do really dangerous and stupid things because they're trying to adhere to this standard.
Do you think, let's say, females and males were raised the same, or at least encouraged to have the same level of physical activity and all the things that we're talking about that could generate, say, more testosterone in females? Do you think it would still be the same level as males?
The same level of?
If testosterone makes it more natural to show aggression or have aggressive tendencies, with males having that within them, you say because they're more encouraged to take more risk and do activities that would generate that more?
I mean, I think it's interesting, right? Because even the way we define aggression is calibrated to the way men display it. We don't think, for example, of girls and women's relational aggression in the same way. Girls and women are very aggressive. They're just aggressive in ways that aren't typically standard, and we think of typically standard as the way men act. Do you see what I'm saying?
Like passive aggressiveness?
Well, passive, yeah. I mean, relational aggression is central to understanding a way in which girls and women are forced to work around the prohibitions on more blunt force aggression. So, you know, people kind of make jokes about mean girls, but in fact, those dynamics are aggressive dynamics. They have to do with status and hierarchies and policing people's behavior in pretty much the same way that boys and men do physically. So the aggression that girls and women have has to find a way out. You cannot live with the anger. You cannot live with the aggression. It will. I think I say in the book that it's like water. You don't. Ignoring it doesn't actually make it go away. It finds its way. And so one of the points of the book is to also challenge the idea that the way we define normal and human and standard should just be the way we think of men. So I use the example of anger management. If you Google anger management, you get a whole lot of images of angry white men screaming at each other and breaking things. Right? And so I think that anger management is problematic for many reasons, but that's the number one reason. And it is that we're all managing our anger all the time, not that way. Most women are not breaking things and screaming at each other, and they're not screaming into computers. They're managing their anger too, or they're mismanaging their anger. By the time someone has an explosive anger episode, they've already been mismanaging their anger for a long time. Doesn't matter what their gender or gender identity is. That explosive episode is the culmination of anger. It's not actually just an anger incident, right? And so we need to appreciate the broad diversity of anger expression. And anger expression can and should include rumination, chronic pain, all kinds of things we don't typically associate with anger.
So while we're talking still about the effects of internalized anger, I did want to talk a little more specifically about the rise in anxiety and depression in girls today. To be honest, I don't know if it's rising in adult women of like non-millennial and younger generations, but I do know that in millennials and younger generations, it is on the rise. I know suicide's on the rise. I'm wondering if you can speak to that.
Well, I mean, I think there's a lot going on with this issue of what's on the rise. I do think there is so much distress in our society. People are worried, they're stressed, they're anxious, they're depressed. But I also think there's greater social receptivity to discussing those issues and to openly sharing those feelings. I mean, a huge issue in our society is that men and boys are not free to express those feelings. They are not free to express vulnerability or fear or mental distress. And so what we have as a result are really high rates of suicide in boys and men or violence against other people. But in fact, the fastest growing demographic, percentage-wise, of people committing suicide is teenage girls. And that should trouble everyone. The overall numbers of suicide should definitely trouble people. But looking at what those levers are, looking at why it might be that certain parts of our community are suffering in these ways, it's important. It's important to understand the differences.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for watching the episode. If you're interested in contributing to the conversation and supporting the show, there's 2 easy things you can do. 1, click subscribe, and 2, visit our Patreon page where you get exclusive access to the Exploring Minds community.